The islands rise green out of the sea, where the waves foam over the grey rocks, and strange things may happen there. Don Allen lived on the biggest island. He had a small farmhouse called a croft, with 10 sheep grazing a few acres of land, and he had a boat for fishing in the sea. His parents were dead, and he had no wife, so he lived there with only a dog called Angus to herd the sheep, and a cat called Cat to keep the croft free of mice. He was lonely sometimes. He would listen to the wind singing in the chimney and wish it were a human voice. One spring morning, Don Allen went down to the beach with his dog Angus for company to rake up the seaweed that he dug into his garden each year. He had gathered a great bale of weed when he thought he heard music from the rocks beside the sea. It was like the voice of the wind, but Don Allen was a long way from his chimney. He went to look, and in wonder and delight, he saw 3 beautiful girls sitting on the rocks, naked, combing their long hair. One of the girls had fair hair, one red and one black. The fair-haired girl was singing. She was the most beautiful of the 3, and Don Allen could not take his eyes from her. He gazed and gazed at her gleaming white body and her long-lashed dark eyes, and he listened to her lilting voice singing its wordless song. And he knew suddenly that he would never be happy unless he could share his life with this magical girl. Then Angus the dog turned from chasing a crab and saw the girls, and he began to growl deep in his throat like summer thunder far away. The 3 girls looked up, startled, and saw Don Allen and his dog. In an instant, each of them snatched up a shapeless bundle that was lying at her side and plunged over the edge of the rocks into the sea. And all at once, they were no longer girls, but selkies, grey seals, 3 sleek shapes flashing dark through the waves. Don Allen stood on the beach forlorn. "Come back," he called to his memory of the lovely singing girl. "Oh, come back." But nothing was there but the empty sea. Don Allen went sadly home, carrying his bale of seaweed, and on the way he met old Thomas. Thomas was the most ancient man in the islands. He had a lame leg and only 3 teeth left in his head, but he had sharp eyes. "And what's the matter with you, Don Allen?" he said. "Did the sea take your boat in exchange for that fine weed?" Don Allen sighed. "I am in love," he said, and he told old Thomas about the beautiful vanished girls who had turned into seals. "Oh, dear me," said old Thomas, whistling through his 3 teeth. "A bad choice you have made, for those are the daughters of the King of Loch Lan, out beyond the sea's brim, and they are selkies indeed. Just once a year, on the 7th day of the highest tides of spring, they get the land longing on them, and they slip out of their skins and take human form for a day." "I love her, the fair-haired one," Don Allen said. "I want her to be my wife." "There's only one way for that," old Thomas said. "What is it then?" said Don Allen quickly. "Tell me, tell me." Old Thomas looked thoughtfully at Don Allen's bale of seaweed. "And what will you give me if I tell you?" he said. "This fine weed for your garden," Don Allen said, "and one like it every year. Will you carry it to my croft?" "I will," Don Allen said eagerly. "And will you dig it into the soil?" "I will, I will." Don Allen snatched old Thomas up from the ground, perched him on top of the seaweed, and carried him off towards his croft. "Tell me," he said. Old Thomas grinned down at him. "You must wait until the same day next year," he said, "at the 7th stream of the flood tide in spring. And if then you are still foolish enough to be in love, you must go to that rock and steal the bundle that is beside the Selkie girl when she is out of the sea, for that is her skin, and without it she cannot become a seal again. You must not destroy it, or she will die, but as long as you keep it safe and hidden, she will follow you and stay with you. Don Allen shouted for joy. Old Thomas said quietly, "But a wild creature will always go back to the wild in the end." Don Allen paid no heed to that. He waited for a year, then went back to the rocky beach on the 7th day of the spring flood tides. There were the 3 girls again, the fair-haired ones singing even more bewitchingly than before. Don Allen crept up to the rock where they sat. The dark-haired girl caught sight of him and cried out in warning, and all 3 girls dived at once into the sea. But Don Allen had hold of the bundled sealskin of the girl he loved. She begged him from the waves, "Oh, please, give me back my skin." Out in the ocean swells, Don Allen could see 2 gleaming shapes swimming, waiting for her. A dark grey seal, and one with reddish skin. "Come with me," he called to the Selkie girl. "Come with me and be my wife, and I will work for you and love you well, and we shall be happy all our days." He walked away up the beach with her skin, knowing she must follow. And when she came after him, he gave her a soft woolen shawl that belonged to his mother to cover her nakedness. She was crying bitterly, but she followed him. So Don Allen married the Selkie girl, and they lived together in the croft with the dog and the cat and the sheep outside grazing the hills. She would not tell him her true name, so he called her Mairi. He kept her sealskin hidden, checking it often to make sure it never cracked or dried out. After the first day, she never asked for it again. Mairi worked as hard as Don Allen on the croft, and because he was gentle and loving, she no longer wept. When their first child was born, he saw her smile, but he never heard her sing again. And each year when the 7th day of the flood tides came round in the spring, he would find her looking sadly out at the sea, with her head tilted as if she were listening. As the years passed, 5 children were born to Mairi and Don Allen, 3 boys and 2 girls. They were called Dougal, Margaret, Niall, Kate Annie and James. They were bright, handsome children, sweet-voiced and strong-backed, and they lived happily on the croft by the sea. Only Kate Annie, who was thoughtful, wondered why she felt sometimes that her quiet mother had lost something precious, and wished that she could give it back to her again. One summer day, Don Allen got up very early before the sunrise because it was his day for checking secretly that the sealskin was safe and well. Softly he went outside and he pulled 3 stones from the wall of the house, which was as thick as a man's arm is long. Then he took out the sealskin, spread it flat on the ground, rubbed it carefully with oil, and put it back again. He did not see his youngest son, James, who had come creeping out of the house after him. James stared. What was his father doing so secret, so early in the morning? He slipped back indoors to his bed, wondering, what was so special about the skin of a seal? Later that day, Don Allen took the 3 biggest children out to the fields. James went outside the house and looked at the wall. He could see the place where his father had moved the stones. He went back to his mother, who was making oatcakes with Kate Annie. "Mother," he said, "why is my father keeping an old sealskin in our wall?" Mairi stopped mixing the dough. Very slowly, she put down the bowl and spoon on the table, and she looked at James as if she had never seen him before. Both children saw a glow of happiness like sunlight in her face, and for the first time in their lives they heard her laugh. "Oh, James," she said, "you have found my skin." She took his hand and Kate Annie's, and the 3 of them ran outside and took the sealskin from the wall. Mairi laughed again in delight, and Kate Annie felt warm at the sound. Come, Mairi said to them, and with the skin in her arms, she led them down to the sea. Kate Annie felt frightened, and yet she knew that something right was happening, whatever it might be. Their mother said to them, "Be brave, because I must leave you. For I was brought here from my own people against my will, 20 years past. And I have 5 children in the sea, and 5 on the land. And that is a hard case to be in." Kate Annie said, "We have brothers and sisters in the sea." "You have," she said, "and so do I." "Don't go," James said. He blinked hard because he felt he was too old to cry. "I love you," Mairi said, and she stroked his hair. "I shall never be far away." She raised her head and looked out at the sea. "You must go to them. It's their turn," Kate Annie said. She took her brother's hand. "I'll look after James." Mairi stepped into the sea and smiled at the wash of the waves about her feet. She said, "I shall always be here watching over you, whether you are in the islands or on the sea, I promise you. And every year at the 7th stream of the flood tide in spring, you will all see me as I am now." She kissed them and she dived into the sea, holding the sealskin. Out in the ocean swells, they saw 2 gleaming shapes swimming, waiting for her. A dark grey seal and one with reddish skin. Then suddenly there were 3, as a light-coloured seal joined them. The 3 curved and swirled and dived together in the foaming water, and then they were gone. "She isn't drowned, is she?" James said. "Of course not," said Kate Annie. "Come home and we'll bake the oatcakes." They told Don Allen when he came back. He said sorrowfully, "Old Thomas was right in the end." But none of the children understood what he meant. Whenever Don Allen and his children went fishing in all the years afterwards, their nets took 3 times as many fish as those of anyone else. When storms churned the waves and threw wrecks on the shore, their boat was always safe. There were tales that great grey seals had been seen carrying it on their backs. In spring, at the flood tide, the family would go down to the rocks by the sea, and they would come back with a look on their faces like sunlight. And still, today, if you listen to the wind blowing around Don Allen's house, there is a singing in it that seems to come from the sea. The islands rise green out of the sea, where the waves foam over the grey rocks, and strange things may happen there.